The sun rose across Lôkhiin on a crisp, cold morning at the end of summer, painting the clouds pink as it touched the horizon. The streets were quiet, the silence even deeper than usual. For most of the city's able-bodied men, a group of many different crafts gathered at the abandoned watchtower outside the walls and spread out into the wilderness. They would stay there for several days, hunting and fishing to gather the food that would get the city through the coming weeks. Before the sun had well risen above the horizon and life would return to the sleeping streets, Uncle Birka arrived at the same watchtower, along with Njal and the children he had fathered himself. Not to hunt, but to train their archery, for one day they too were to follow in the huntsman's footsteps. "How many times do I have to tell you? Face the target sideways," said Birka as he came forward and helped Njal into the right position. "There, now concentrate." Njal pulled back the arrow as far as he could, leaning backwards and groaning as he could barely muster the strength to hold it in place. He bit his lip, his breath steaming through his nose as he tried to focus on the trunk he was aiming for. He then let fly, but the arrow ended up in the snow just a few feet away from him. At pretty much the same time, his niece Hilde, a lean and agile girl of 12, just 1 year older than Njal, fired her arrow too. With a soft whistle, it flew gently through the thin wisps of fog gliding through the icy tundra, and hit the trunk not far from the middle. As Birka applauded for her in his thick fur gloves, Njal let out a deep sigh of disappointment. Even though he long knew Hilde was unnaturally gifted at archery, and he had admired her skill ever since he first saw her shooting, when she demonstrated the difference between them, it gave Njal a hopeless feeling. He would never be as good as she was. "Don't worry, Njal. Try again. You'll get there," said Birka, standing next to him with crossed arms. He turned around, wanting to say it was of no use to try again, but he read in his uncle's eyes he was not going to accept it. He had to persist. "Go on," he urged. Njal breathed out his anger, grabbed himself together, and took another arrow from the quiver at his belt, destined to prove himself now. Wearing fingerless gloves, his fingertips ached of frostbite, as were his ears and nose, but he tried to ignore it and maintain his focus. "Hold on," said Birka, as he helped Njal to fine-tune his position. "Don't lean back. Stand as straight as possible." He pulled the arrow back again, feeling his arms trembling under the pressure as Birka's hand maintained his stance. "Eyes to the feather. Look to where you want it to go." He did as he was told, feeling the pressure of Hilde and his 9-year-old nephew Bien looking at him. Birka then let go and put a few steps back. "Whenever you're ready, Njal." He narrowed his eyes, had one last look at the trunk, particularly to Hilde's arrow, and then let go. His shot did not fare nearly as well as he had hoped, ending up well wide of his target. He heard Bien grin from a distance, and his hands turned into fists. He wanted to throw the bow away as hard as he could, but managed to relent. He did so before in father's presence once, and he was repaid for his lack of discipline with a slap at the back of his head. "Curse this, uncle. I can't do it. I will never be a hunter," he said in frustration. Birka came over, grinning, and laid a hand on his shoulders. "You know, little man, I stood here on this very spot back when I was your age, and I didn't hit anything confidently before I was 14. Can you imagine? It frustrated me just as much as you, perhaps even more." Njal turned to Birka to see if he wasn't playing games, but he nodded back with sparkling eyes, smiling behind his thick red beard. "And what did you do?" "My father forced me to go back here every morning, in the fog, in the wind, in the rain, every morning, until at some point I finally hit it without his help for the first time. Spirits above, I felt proud then. Yet, It was not until many years later that I realized how important a lesson he taught me on that day. That with time, dedication, and lots of effort, there is no limit to what you can achieve. Njal still couldn't help but to think Birka had made the story up just to comfort him. And apparently it showed. He grinned again. Just be patient, Njal, and keep practicing. Before you know it, you will see yourself getting better. And perhaps, when you stand here next to your own children one day, you might just teach them the same lesson. Njal looked at his uncle once more after repeating his words in his head, and curled up his mouth in a light smile. And besides, once you do make it, you can laugh back at that little brat over there when he goes through the same as you, he joked as he gestured at Bien. Regarding that his smirk disappeared quickly, Njal knew that Birka's words had come across. Speaking of laughing back, he said then, as he came closer and lowered his voice, his eyes sparkling naughtily. I think someone needs his head rubbed into the snow for a punishment. Don't you agree? Njal put down his bow, smirked broadly, and ran after Bien as fast as he could, as he heard his uncle laughing loudly behind him. As soon as he reached his nephew, they fell down into the snow, wrestling playfully until Njal had held him tightly underneath himself. Stop! I yield! I yield! Said Bien between his laughing. Njal smiled and helped him back up his feet before they answered their uncle's whistle and ran back. Well done, he said, as he threw each of them one of the wooden practice swords he had brought with him. Now, continue your duel with these. True warriors do far more than just shooting arrows and wrestling now, do they? Crossing swords with Bien fared him a lot better than using the bow, and it would not be a hard choice for him what weapon to carry once he was to be a warrior himself, much like his older brother Almer would soon become. He had just turned 18, the year that marked the transition to manhood, so now was the first time he was allowed to accompany father on the hunt. It was according to the ancient tradition that after the first hunt was done, any 18-year-old could be named warrior of Moravia by the king, placing him formally in service of the kingdom. Njal longed for that day, probably just as much as Almer did himself. But above all, he hoped that he would one day follow in his brother's footsteps and be just as strong and skilled as he was. When the sun had risen higher and the fog of dawn disappeared, Birka called it a day, and they walked back through the icy tundra towards the ancient stone walls and towers of Lôkhiin, or what was left of them. Father had told him once that 100 years ago it used to be one of the largest cities in all of Svôzin, but since then it had been destroyed twice, and he was there the second time it happened. He spoke about how the armies of the alien empire had come from the south, invaded their land, and destroyed most of the city during the onslaught. That Lôkhiin had since then mostly fallen to ruin had its upside though, for now there were lots of hidden corridors and forgotten ruins for him to explore. What were now the city walls were once the fortifications of just the inner districts. Much of the surrounding tundra was once covered with houses, towers, walls and fortifications, all buried beneath the ice now. Below the city even ran an expansive network of ancient dungeons that Njal had learned were once used as both a shelter and a prison. Both father and Uncle Birka had always strictly forbidden him and the other children to enter, should they ever find an entrance, for it was easy to get lost down there. Aunt Saga even told him once that the restless ghosts of fallen warriors were still wandering through the pitch-black corridors. Almer, who had been there many times, promised to one day show him what it was like. Therefore, Njal couldn't wait until he got back from the hunt, so he could finally fulfill his long-cherished wish. Yet, until that time arrived, he longed to spend the rest of the day showing Bien another secret he had recently discovered. One that was at least as impressive to venture through as the catacombs were. After they had briefly returned to Uncle Birka's house at the market square to drop their equipment, such was exactly what they set out to do. The sun was shining brightly by now, and life had returned to Lôkhiin's ruined streets. Since most of the men were gone, the elderly, women, and children were now the only ones wandering around. "Where do we go?" asked Bien, as they had set out into the square, which was being cleared of the snow that had fallen overnight by some of the residents. The sound of the shovels outvoted that of the few residents that had come here to meet up. "Race you to the tower? I can show it to you there." Bien smirked at him in agreement. "All right. 3, 2, 1, go!" They ran off as fast as they could, across the square and through the street, dodging the people they met, as well as the rubble of collapsed houses and the large dunes of snow that had built up throughout the years. At the far end of the street there was another ruined watchtower, of which only half was still standing, but they knew by now that it was safe to climb its stairs. Once up, they squirmed their way through the narrow shaft and jumped onto the roof of a nearby house. After he had made it first, Njal aided Bien in his landing by catching him, and they proceeded onwards together. Some people were staring and pointing at them as they stood on the narrow wooden beam they balanced upon, but Njal had long got used to it. He had been running and climbing around the city ever since he had moved here, much like he had always climbed the trees around his village when he still lived with his mother. First with his friends, but when they had all gone, all on his own. Therefore, he was glad he had met Bien here in Lôkhiin. He was his best friend, his nephew, and a new brother to Njal all at once, and he had managed to take him along in his unrelenting enthusiasm for exploring. As they navigated across the rooftops, the bystanders just watched them as they went about their way, some of them shaking their heads, and then walked on. After the 4 years he had lived here now, Njal assumed they had started getting used to the sight of these two boys running across the rooftops. Even though the one-story houses were not very high, from the roof one could see the entire city, as well as the land surrounding it, most notably the great Olyseer in the distance, covered still in clouds and fog. It was a view that Njal never grew tired to behold. When he looked back and waited for Bien to catch up, he saw the market square at the heart of the city, surrounded by the biggest and most beautiful houses, including the one where they lived. Bordering the square, on the hill at the conjunction of two large rivers, lay the robust and walled citadel of the King of Moravia. It wasn't the only citadel in the city though, as far away from the city's heart, just past the walls at Lôkhiin's western edge, lay the vast ruins of what was called the Old Citadel. Its big, dark grey donjon and robust towers rose up high above everything else around, and overlooked both the river and the oldest ruins of Lôkhiin from the hill it stood upon. It was this very place where Njal was intending to go. He pointed in his direction as Bien had made it over to him. "There, you see it? I found a way into the Old Citadel." "How?" he asked. "Did you find a way across the walls?" "Not across the walls," Njal answered, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "Underneath them." Bien frowned, but didn't have the time to respond, as Njal was already pulling his arm in the rush to show his new discovery. "Come on, let's go! You have to see this!" They walked across the wooden bar to the other side of the house, jumped across to the next, crossed it halfway through, and then slid down the roof to land into a snow dune. Rolling down to the bottom, they bumped into an older man, causing him to drop the logs of firewood he was holding. "Watch it, you little brats!" he shouted. A nearby guard sighed and shook his head. "It's Birka's boys again. Will they ever grow up?" Njal heard him saying to his comrade. They didn't bother much about it, though, continuing on their way until it became far more quiet as they neared the city's edge. The houses they came across here had long fallen to ruin, and it looked like nothing had been done to clean the rubble that the wars had left behind. They were all cold, dark, and empty, inhabited only by the shadows of those who had once called them their home. Some of the people they encountered were scrambling firewood and stone to repair their homes, but most of the men, women, and children who resided here, cramped around their poorly built campfires between the ruins, were refugees from the villages and holdfasts in the countryside. Uncle Birka once said that many of them were farmers in the past, driven to Lôkhiin by years of hunger and scarcity. They had come here in desperate search for food and a better future, a choice most of them would come to regret. Njal knew their reason to come here was the same as his own, but Birka had emphasized that these people were not nearly as lucky as he was, that both his father and uncle belonged to the king's companions. As they passed the refugees, trying to avoid eye contact as much as they could, his uncle's urgent warning to stay away from the refugees repeated within his mind. For, as he would always say, desperate people could be capable of desperate things if you are not careful. Despite these grim warnings, Njal could not help but to pity them too, as they ran past them. Every time he looked at their emaciated bodies and sensed the despair when looking into their eyes, he felt almost guilty for the luck that he had. He was a refugee himself after all, and he knew that the food fathers and the others set out to hunt together was not going to them. In times of crisis, the original residents and those useful to the city in some way would always come first. It was going to be a cold, long winter, he feared, probably even colder than the last. Even now in summer, Njal knew he would freeze to death if he would stay outside for too long and would not dress properly. The refugees did not even have a roof above their heads, nor did they have food to fill their bellies or warm clothes to keep the cold away. The thought that many of these refugees were not going to survive the coming winter wounded Njal's heart, but he also knew there was nothing he could do about it. Uncle Birka always said that if they would share the meager rations they had with the refugees, it would only delay their inevitable demise a little longer. After a short while, the rubble of a collapsed tower led them back to the safety of a partially collapsed roof. They jumped down inside the house, and then climbed across another pile of rubble from a window to finally make it to Lôkhiin's walls. Crossing them was not hard, for there were numerous breaches within them. So many, in fact, that Lôkhiin's guards could not muster the numbers to patrol them all. Here, there was no living soul to be found. "Come quickly, before anyone sees us," said Njal, as he looked around to see if they weren't followed. They crossed the walls into the vast open tundra, where the remains of ancient towers, fragments of walls and houses greeted them amidst the large dunes of snow that had built up throughout the years. The only place that still stood tall here was the Old Citadel itself, surrounded by its own set of walls and towers. Like the donjon itself, they were badly damaged and partially breached in many places. But even despite countless efforts, Njal had never been able to climb them. Even the collapsed gateway was filled with so much rubble that there was no more room to squeeze through. Father had overheard Njal talking to Almer about his desire to explore it, and he had warned him strongly about the consequences of exploring it while he was away with the huntsmen. In fact, the stories Aunt Saga had told him only fueled his enthusiasm. She had told that after the destructive battle that brought it to ruin, the Old Citadel, now littered with dead bodies, became a shelter for Neva, the god of death, taking the shape of a black dire wolf. Njal never believed Saga's story, thinking instead that father had instructed her to tell it in an attempt to scare him off. He wouldn't let her trick stop him, he thought, and when they reached the weathered walls, Njal looked around to find out where he had found it yesterday. "How did you get underneath the walls then? Was there a tunnel or something?" asked Bien as he looked around himself. "There, near those dunes," he said, upon recognizing his previous route. Njal led Bien towards some large boulders and surrounding snow dunes, and he could now see his own traces on the ground, followed them, and after removing the thin layer of snow that had fallen overnight, the entrance to a small, narrow tunnel finally revealed itself. It was sealed off by a thick wooden hatch and was carefully hidden in between the boulders. "Wow, that's incredible," said Bien, his big blue eyes sparkling with both excitement and anxiety. After gently touching the latch, he relented and looked back to Njal. "Are you sure we are allowed to do this?" "I think you're not." They both startled and paralyzed in their shock as they suddenly heard Hilda's voice behind them. How could they not have seen her following them? Njal wondered. Probably your father would kill us if he ever gets to know this. He warned us not to go here the day before he left. How did you know we were here? I didn't see you anywhere, said Njal. You're getting predictable, Hilda answered, pushing him and Bien aside and opening the hatch herself. A dark, gloomy and icy tunnel revealed itself ahead of them. Njal had not dared to get in there all on his own. It had been near the onset of darkness when he had found it yesterday. He didn't know how long it was and feared to get lost in there, so he eventually decided to go back and try it again come the next morning. It does look exciting, Hilda admitted, fearless as she was. Just imagine what we could find on the other side, Njal said. It must lead to the Old Citadel. The tunnel heads right towards it. Shall we go in? Hilda asked. Her eyes met those of Njal, and when they both smirked at the same time, they knew neither of them was able to refuse the urge. Opening the hatch and laying it to rest on the ground, they started making their way through the narrow, moist and icy cold tunnel that was just broad enough for them to walk through. There were no further corridors. The path just went straight ahead, the thought of which comforted Njal as the darkness completely encroached them halfway through. Ow, you're standing on my foot, you idiot, mourned Hilda, before giving Njal a hard push. I'm sorry, he said between his laughter. Bien grinned behind them. Keep laughing and you'll be next, lashed Hilda as they walked on. After a while, the narrow beams of daylight through the hatch on the other side let them know that they had made it through. Njal let out a sigh of relief. He had just begun to worry how long this tunnel was and where it would actually lead them. When Hilda opened it and they had their eyes adjust to the sunlight, the mighty bastion of the Old Citadel towered high above them like a mountain. Wow, we made it, said Bien, looking around in amazement. They all listened closely to catch up any signs of habitation, looking at the dark, empty windows, the holes that catapults had once smashed into its walls, the almost snow-buried well, the ruined barracks, and the mighty battered oaken doors at the front entrance. It was guarded by ancient and weathered statues of warriors leaning on large double-sided axes. Even though they were made of stone, Njal could feel their intimidating gazes upon him, as if they were somehow real and warned him not to enter. It was a very eerie place they had found themselves in. Njal's heart raced in his chest, unsure whether it was his nerves or the excitement that caused it, and every time he looked around, he feared he would hear a voice or see someone looking at them from one of the shadowy corners or windows. They kept listening for another while, but all they could ever hear was a deep silence, of a kind that spelled danger rather than comfort. I'm pretty sure there's no one here, Njal. Even the snow says so. Not a footprint to be seen, said Hilda. Njal gestured at the oak doors. Shall we go in? I don't think I dare to go, said Bien. Yet, Njal couldn't resist the urge, and softly started towards the doors, with Hilda following closely behind his back. When edging past, they entered a huge throne room, and even inside, he was met by daylight from above. The roof and the upper floors had long collapsed, it seemed, filling the floor with mountains of rubble. The doorways he noticed on the sides of the throne room had all been blockaded. At the far end of a corridor, flanked by large stone pillars that once stood to hold up a ceiling, stood an elevated platform, and placed upon it was an ancient-looking stone throne. Is it safe? Asked Bien, as he still stood waiting by the doors. I think so, said Hilda, and after hesitating a bit, Bien followed them inside, his mouth opening in awe as he looked around himself. Look at that throne! Imagine how old it is, he said, as he came over to Njal's side. Probably 1,000 years, he answered. Maybe even older. Let's find out if there is anything more to see here. Njal strided around the throne room to see if there were any hidden rooms or passages that were still accessible. The broad stone stairs that arose both to the left and to the right of the throne no longer led anywhere. The doorways beyond the throne had long collapsed too. In between the pillars, Bien had picked up a rusty old sword from amidst the rubble. "Wow, Hilda, look what I found." "Come here with that thing, before you poke yourself in the eye," she said playfully as she came over. "Try and catch me if you can," Bien said, laughing as they began pursuing one another. "Quiet," Njal urged, continuing his search. Beyond them, at the far right corner of the throne room, Njal saw another doorway that was blocked by rubble. But he did wonder whether or not there was another doorway at the exact other side. It was the last possibility to find something to explore here, and when he had crossed the hall to take a look, he saw that doorway was shrouded in darkness. It had not yet collapsed, he realized, his heart racing of excitement. There was a way further into the citadel. He ran over and noticed there was a stairway going down. It did not vanish into the darkness, however, for all the way at the bottom, before the hallway made a turn to the right, he saw the flickering of torchlight in the distance. His stomach turned at the sight. Perhaps they weren't alone here after all. "Hilda, Bien, come here, you have to see this," he said, as soft as possible. The others seemingly noticed the anxiety in his voice. Hilda dropped the sword, the smile vanishing instantly, and both she and Bien ran over immediately. Bien's eyes got big as he looked down at the torchlight below. "There's someone else here," he whispered. "Maybe it has been lit several hours ago, or several days. Perhaps the one who lit it is already gone," Hilda said, keeping her voice down too. "What do we do?" asked Njal. "We should go home, now," Bien said, frightened, starting back towards the entrance. "He is right. We should leave this place, before we get ourselves in trouble," Hilda said. Njal nodded in agreement, took one last look at the dark passageway ahead and made for the oaken doors. Yet, just when Bien had made it first, Njal suddenly witnessed that he had stopped moving, paralyzed in fear and shock as he sharpened his ears. It caused Njal to startle and stop moving too. "What is it?" asked Hilda. "Voices," Bien said, instilled with panic. "I hear voices." Njal sharpened his ears, and much to his shock, he heard them too. It were male voices, and though he couldn't make up exactly what they said, they were very close. Njal's eyes met those of Hilda, and he could read fear within them, something he rarely ever saw. "Hide inside. I'll go take a look and see if I can distract them, and then run to get father." "Do you mean we have to get inside a tunnel?" Bien asked, looking incredulously at both Hilda and Njal. Then the voices were heard once more, this time even closer. "Go, now," said Hilda, as she ran off outside. "Come," said Njal, pulling Bien's arm before he could run after her and drag them back inside. "No, not in there," he said as they approached the tunnel. "We have to, Bien. It is the only way out of this room. Perhaps down there we can find a place to hide." Bien could not make up a reply, which was enough for Njal to know he was right. Softly and silently they descended down the stairs. The freezing air became moist and thick, as if they were entering a cavern. After its rightward turn, it descended further, deeper and deeper underground, to eventually lead into a larger room with a low ceiling. The two torches hung at the pillars at the center of the room were far enough to light the entire space. But it was just enough for Njal to see there were more corridors in each direction. Each of them was sealed off by a rusty iron cell door. "What is this place? It looks like a prison," said Bien fearfully. "I think these are the city catacombs," said Njal. It looked just like how Alma had always described it to him. "This should be a good place to hide. If they get here, they will never be checking out all those doors." Before they could find out what was behind them, suddenly they heard the voices again, echoing loudly. Whoever they were, they must have been inside the citadel by now. "Njal, we must move on, now!" Quickly they rushed for the door that was right on the other side of the room. It was locked, and the bars were just too tightly crammed together that they could move through. They ran off to another, only to find that one locked too. A third door, at the right end of the room, distinguished itself from the others by the presence of torchlight at the far end of the hallway, and much to his own relief, the door could be opened. As the voices grew ever louder, and they witnessed the flickering of torchlight and the casting of long shadows in the distance, they rushed in without second thought, forgetting to close the door behind them. Running through the corridor, they soon entered another room, narrow and long, but much smaller than the one they had come from. There were niches in the room, and in each of them was placed a stone coffin. Most of them were empty, but some of them were still closed. There were ancient-looking bones scattered across the floor, as if someone had been robbing the graves, and the air was thick and oppressive, as if it were as old as those that were buried here. On an altar in the middle, amidst the bones and coffins, burned the dim light of a candle, and next to it lay a skeleton, whose dark, empty eyes eerily glared right at them. The place caused Njal to feel so disgusted, he wanted nothing else but to turn around and try a different door, but he knew it was too late for that now. "Njal, this is a crypt," Bien said softly, but with a voice instilled with panic. "We must get out of here now." Njal did not respond, however, for his gaze was caught by something flickering in the faint glow of the candle. A strange pull tugged at him, a pull he could not ignore. There, nestled in the soft light, gleamed a polished moonstone embedded in an amulet of twisted black steel, formed into two dragons, that coiled around it. The stone was black, like the deepest of nights, and the jewel looked awfully familiar to Njal. "There, a door," said Bien, running for the door at the other end of the room, and he started trying to open it. The noise it made couldn't bother Njal anymore. A chill ran through his spine as he reached for the amulet, and on the very moment his skin made contact, a strange, ice-cold and tingling sensation spread from his hand across his arm to the rest of his body, causing him to shiver. As the cold reached his head, his vision blurred, and a terrible pain shot through his skull with such force he feared he would lose his consciousness. He gripped the altar for support, but it lasted only briefly, and the pain soon started to slowly fade away. "Njal, come over!" Bien shouted in complete panic as he wildly shook the door back and forth. "It's locked!" With Njal still in shock by what had just happened to him, they heard the loud bang of the iron door against the wall above them, and both of them were stunned into silence. "It came from down there! Move!" sounded the loud voices above them, this time closer than ever. As the thunderous sound of heavy boots pounded down the stone stairs, Njal's eyes met those of Bien in the flickering candlelight, and he could see he thought the same. There was no escape. They were in deep trouble. A breath caught in Njal's throat. Without a second thought, he slipped the amulet into a pocket beneath his furs. His heart raced as shadows crept around the corner, and they were met by men whose faces were hidden behind iron helmets and shields, bearing the sigil of a bear's claw.